Good afternoon and welcome to the March edition of the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Macklin, and I'm joined today by Natasha Alsop from Walker Family Law. We set up the Divorce Support Club, I think it's maybe 5.5, 6 years ago now, to provide something a bit extra to the legal services that Walker Family Law provide, to give those watching, whether they're clients or not, resources, extra information, information about how they can handle the emotional impact of divorce. So today, we're going to talk about building up your confidence during divorce. But before we get going, Natasha, would you like to just very quickly introduce yourself and who you are?
Yeah, afternoon, Claire. I am Natasha Alsop. I'm a solicitor in our family department, dealing mainly with divorce and divorce, finances, cohabitation disputes, children matters, based in our Exeter office.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I'm Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I work alongside Walker Family Law to support their clients emotionally through the process and beyond. So I thought it would be helpful, first of all, to kind of set the scene because divorce is a hugely challenging time, and it's a time when you may find that you begin to doubt yourself a lot, and there are lots of reasons why that might happen. Um, Part of the healing journey through divorce and through grief is the bargaining stage, and people don't always realise this. This is the point at which you think, am I doing the right thing if it was your choice? Or if perhaps I could only be more, I don't know, funnier or more attractive or fitter, then maybe this wouldn't be happening. Could I perhaps have tried harder? So that can sort of eat into your self-confidence. The emotional trauma as well of going through divorce. Perhaps you have been faced with infidelity or betrayal, or you've been in a long-term, very difficult, perhaps toxic marriage. Those things can also diminish your ability to trust your own judgment, and to feel confident in yourself. And then, of course, there's confusion. Your partner may be behaving suddenly very differently to how you're used to them behaving. Perhaps you think, oh, I don't really know this person anymore. Perhaps they're saying hurtful things, and all of that also can lead you to questioning your own perceptions of what's happening. And then, of course, there's fear of the unknown. There's worry, perhaps, about being alone. Perhaps your living circumstances are changing, or perhaps you don't know quite what they're going to look like in the future. Perhaps you're feeling worried about your financial situation. Perhaps you're worried about your children. All of these create anxiety. And there's a transition in identity that people go through when you're going through a divorce. So you're no longer, I remember this really clearly myself, I was no longer a wife, I was somebody's ex-wife, and that's a whole new role. And there's a whole new different way that we needed to communicate with each other. So it left me questioning kind of, who am I? I'm no longer part of this team that I used to be part of. So who am I now? And something that I also hear quite often in my sessions is that people feel somehow like their divorce perhaps feels a bit like a failure. People judge themselves really harshly sometimes, or perhaps you feel like you're being judged by the people around you, and all of those can cause you to lose confidence and feel smaller as well. And then, of course, there's grief for the loss of the future you thought you were going to have. And sometimes that sadness can perhaps make you feel like you've maybe made a mistake or you can't trust your own judgment. So we're going to look today at some ways that you can start to rebuild that confidence and rebuild your trust in yourself, both through this process and beyond. And I know I've given a very kind of emotional backdrop to that. And I wondered, Natasha, what kind of things do you see in your work in this area?
Thanks, Claire. I mean, it's very variable because it depends on what
Mm,
stage someone is at.
mm,
And that varies from person to person. But particularly if it's the early stages or if it's come as a shock to the person coming in to see you,
mm,
or it can be, months ahead and it's still difficult to come to terms with that decision either that you're making or the other person's making. And it does often mean that obviously people's confidence has changed, their confidence in who they are, how they approach decision making can then be
mm,
difficult. If someone's lost their confidence, when they come in to see a solicitor and say, this is what I want out of this process, that can actually even be difficult to do,
Mm,
because you're feeling, your whole decision making process, is being put into question really, because your actual, what you thought was going to happen hasn't. Or you may be the person making the decision and the other party might not, and that actually might in it, that other person might not be as confident. So there's lots of kind of aspects of how you might then want to build that confidence. But what I do
mm,
see, I mean, if someone comes in to see me, they, because their own decision making might not be for any reason as clear as it could be, that they're then worried about, often they're worried about making the wrong choice about something. Can be really difficult on a first meeting, and sometimes people bring friends or they bring family members because so much to take in, and a solicitor will be
mm,
saying, there's this possibility, you could do this, you could do that, there's option A, there's option B, and that person's then confronted with having to make a decision. So they would normally go away, speak to friends and family, or they might, decide that they don't need to do that. It might be within themselves. And then they are afraid. What you often hear is, I just need to make sure that I make the right decision. I must make the right decision.
yeah,
And I think that's, again, something that I often see that people, they really want to make sure that they go down the right route,
mm,
um, to be guided by us solicitors or friends and family who can help, or other professionals who can try and help them on that path. I think that's probably, and
yeah,
I mean, and also I think it really largely depends on where you are in the process of your own relationship breaking down. Then when you come to see us about the legal
mm,
process, um, but sometimes it might be that it's really clear to any professionals that that person needs a bit more time. They might have just
mm,
felt so, it's a traumatic experience, isn't it? Your relationship breaking down for some, and they might have
yes,
come out of a really difficult relationship where there has been other things that have made it incredibly
mm,
difficult to then move on. So that might be a situation where we do say, actually, I think you just need some more time to think about this. Is this what you
yeah,
want? Is this what you do?
yeah,
You want to revisit this option or that option, and take as much time as you need? It might be that someone needs a week to think about things. Other people might need 3 or 4 months to reflect, and then,
yes,
yeah. So
yeah,
that's what I see. I think I see it's so varied, but
mm,
the things that I think are repeated is people being concerned that they're going to make the wrong decision.
yes, yeah. I hear that too. I don't want to regret this later. I need to make the right choice now. I think your advice about taking time to reflect is really good, especially given the emotional impact of relationship breakdown. Lots of people will find themselves, or in fact, almost everybody, I would suggest, finds themselves in a situation where sometimes the emotions are really heightened. When your emotions are really heightened, it's very difficult for your logical brain to make a decision. And so um, taking time out to allow your brain to get a little bit more used to the situation that you find yourself in can be a really sensible thing to do.
And the other
Um,
thing, just to interrupt, Claire, before you move
yeah,
on, the other thing that we get, just thinking about
mm,
that some clients will want you to do for them is make the decision for them, because they are
yes,
lacking at the time of, as you say, again, it depends on the client, but certainly some clients will be in such a difficult position at that time that they might not feel that they're able to make that decision.
mm,
They won't feel very confident in their own decision making. So you will, it's quite common. I'm sure that I've done it in the past to other professionals. I just wish you could make the decision for me. What would you do? What would you do in this? If you were in my shoes now, what what would you do next? And that's
mhm,
really difficult for us as professionals because we can't, it has to be their decision, and you can guide them with pros and cons, but it's got to be
yes.
finally their decision to make.
Yeah, I think something that's often really useful at that point is to talk through a kind of roadmap, of next steps, isn't it? What might the next steps be to help you be able to think about that decision or to be able to think about which choice you'd like to make, and then make a sort of a very clear roadmap of what those next steps are. Who might you need to speak to? Perhaps you might need to speak to a financial person. Perhaps the next step is to go and seek some support from a coach or a therapist, so to help people understand what the next steps are, rather than trying to leap right to the end of the choice making journey, if you like. Um, I think I want to pick up on this sort of decision paralysis thing where people are finding it really difficult to make decisions because there's some brain science behind this that I just wanted to talk through. So our brains really like the familiar, even when the familiar isn't very good for us, or we know deep down that it's not the right choice for us. It really likes the familiar, and it also focuses on threats or negatives. So we'll focus on the negatives of any kind of change in order to survive. And this goes right back to early human beings, where we needed to have a very heightened alert system to warn us of predators. And that emotional part of our brain that's kind of lives back here at the top of our brainstem hasn't really developed much since then. It still responds to threats, and I mean, the process of divorce is filled with things that would be seen as threats. You know, a letter comes in from your solicitor or a phone call, or you've got to make a choice about something. And our brain really doesn't like it. And there's so much uncertainty through divorce. So for example, before perhaps you might be questioning whether it was the right choice. During, you might be thinking, I can't make any of these decisions. And afterwards, you may feel perhaps like you're kind of standing on the edge of a cliff and you have to sort of jump off into a new life. And that threat response can have a really big impact on daily life. So I'd say one of the things that really helps with that kind of paralysis in making decisions is to learn some very simple techniques to slow your emotional brain down. Some breathing strategies, box breathing, for example, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4. And just to go round that 3 or 4 times, just to slow your responses down, can really help. And it helps to bring your logical brain back on side. So I think that's just a very simple tip for something that people can do. Um, and then the other thing that I wanted to really pick up on what you said, which is really interesting, and I see this too, was around making the wrong or the right decision. Because I think if you approach the decisions that you need to make with the mindset of there's either a right answer or a wrong answer, it's going to make everything seem a lot harder because it only gives you two options. And what I'd like people to take away is, having confidence in your decisions doesn't mean necessarily knowing what the outcome of that decision will be 100%. It's knowing that you'll be able to manage whatever the outcome. And wanting to know 100% whether something is right or wrong can really keep you stuck. So I thought it might be helpful for us to kind of run through some reframing kind of questions for shifting thought from perhaps I'm scared of making the wrong decision to I'm making a decision based on what I know right now, or based on the information that I have, or based on my values and beliefs, or based on the advice of the professionals around me. So some really helpful tools to help with that. First of all, I would say get information and clarity. So seek advice. Clarity is the antidote to overwhelm. Seek advice. If, for example, it's the numbers, go and talk to a financial advisor, get some real advice on exactly what the numbers look like. And then break everything down into steps. So a good question to perhaps, if you're in meetings with your solicitor or a financial advisor, is to ask, what's the next one step that I could take on this road so that you have some certainty around that. And then, and really going much more into the mindset part of this, ask yourself some really good questions. So, for example, can you identify a time in the past when you've overcome a challenge, or you've overcome something, or you've learned something new? What resources did you use? I mean, these are the kind of questions that I ask all the time in my coaching sessions. How did you feel before you use those resources, and how did you feel afterwards? And how could you use those experiences to help you now? I use the kind of analogy of climbing a mountain and using your owl brain and your wow brain for this. So if you imagine you are climbing a mountain and you got halfway up and this mountain is getting steeper. So you're halfway up, you've got a choice. You can look up and use your owl brain and say, ow, look how much more I've got to do. Look how difficult it's going to be. Or you can turn around and look down the mountain and think, wow, look what I've already done. Look what I've already overcome. Look at the steep bits I've already traversed. Look at the rocks that I've already climbed over. And how did I do that? And how could I use that going forward? So this is about looking
Yeah.
back for times when you have overcome something and using that evidence to help fight those kind of um those negative thoughts. Begin to add something, Natasha.
No, I was just thinking about the things that you've done already, and I think in the divorce
Mm,
process, particularly legally, where you're asking, where clients say it feels so overwhelming, but it's
mm,
surprising how much they do achieve. So it might even be, being
yes.
asked by a solicitor to go and have estate agents come in and do a market appraisal of the home. For someone might be in a situation where they've never dealt with anything like that. It was all dealt with by the other person. There might be someone who did a certain role in the home, and the other person sorted of bills, the finance, the mortgages, and that having, calling an estate agent saying, can you come in and value my home because this is what solicitors asked me to do, that's quite a big step. And just what I mean is, if you've done things that
Mm,
to someone else that might be routine, but to another person that might
yeah.
be quite difficult task to do, because it's
Mm,
something that just doesn't, that they haven't ever had to think about or sort out. Or I might say to someone, could you go off and find out whether the mortgage company will release someone from the mortgage, and they think, oh well, I know who our mortgage is with, I don't, and that all those little steps that they do along the way that build confidence by the end of the process, they probably don't
yeah.
even realize they're doing, for someone who is in that
Yes.
position where they are feeling quite overwhelmed by these things that they've got to think about and make decisions
Mm,
about, act
yeah.
then activate. So it's just when you were saying about think of all the things you have done, there's a lot that you do along the way without even realizing that will then,
Mm,
for
yes.
somebody who hasn't had to do all that before, will feel more confident as a result, because they're suddenly taking control of things that they've never actually done in their marriage, because it wasn't something that
Yeah.
they apart. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think if you start to make a list of those things, start to look for the things that you're doing that you haven't done before, um, and keep a list of them because they start to add up. I remember sitting with a client once in a session, and she was worried about exactly what you've just talked about. She'd never organised the bills and all of those things at home. She hadn't been in charge of that aspect of their lives together. But she had done other things, and she had learned how to do other things in the last 6 months. And when she looked at the evidence of what she had learned how to do that she couldn't do before, she realized that actually this was just another thing to add to the list. Another useful thing that you can do perhaps is if this is something really overwhelming that you are really stumped by, ask yourself, who do you know? Who's in your network who could help you with this? Who do you know in your network who could show you how to do whatever the thing is that you need to do? And so, use your network to help build up your own skills. Um, Another really good question I find, and I ask people this often in sessions, and it's quite interesting sometimes what comes out. I'll either say, if you weren't afraid of whatever it is, if you weren't afraid of doing this thing, what would your first step be? And that's a great question to ask yourself because it presupposes that you are not afraid. So if I wasn't afraid, what would I do? It takes away that kind of fear element and it just makes it something that you can imagine. You don't have to do anything just yet. You can just imagine it. If I wasn't afraid, what might I do?
I
And the
think
other
that's
one, go on.
sorry. Yeah, no, I was just saying, I think that's a good one, which you notice in children, when you're trying to sort out child arrangements, isn't it? And
Yeah,
there's often a client who says, your clients may well say, I really don't think this is working for the children. I don't think this arrangement, but I feel, I don't really want to approach, I don't know, father, mother, whoever, because I'm afraid that that will then, disrupt everything and it will cause
mm,
conflict or whatever the reasons are. But
yeah,
if you say to them, if you didn't, if you weren't kind of afraid of the outcome and or the response, what would you ideally think is better for the children? And they might give you this is what I
yeah,
really think would work.
mm,
Um, so that's quite a kind of good thing about, when you're building your confidence in divorce, it's not just about the finances, it's about what happens for your arrangements for the children, what other practical arrangements do you need to make. Um,
yes.
and
I,
that's a
and I
good
think that
question to ask
works.
yourself when you think about what will
Yeah,
work for the children, I think.
absolutely. And I remember working with a client once who was really worried about the weekends that they were going to have with the children by themselves. And I used that question then, if you weren't worried, what might you plan? And then all these plans came out, all these ideas. And actually what I suggested that they do was to sit down with the children. I think they were sort of 12, 10, and 8, something like that. Sit down with the children and Google stuff and look at pictures in local magazines and write a list of places you want to go and things you want to do and put that list on the fridge. And then you can use that as a kind of basis for something to be planned for the weekends when you're on your own with the children. So it can be a really good opener question, and you can ask it of yourself. If I wasn't afraid right now, or if I wasn't worried about what I was going to do with the children this weekend, what would I plan? Um, and another one that's also really good is what would the most confident version of me do, feel, think right now? Because that takes you outside of yourself in this moment and allows you to contemplate what the most confident version of yourself might do. And that it has a similar kind of effect. It opens up your imagination, which is always a good thing, I think, especially when what you're trying to do is get away from something being either right or wrong. So it's opening up possibilities effectively and giving yourself more options. And then another thing that I talk about a lot with clients is around what you're focusing on. So if you're focusing on, I must get this right, or I don't want to get this wrong, your focus is very, very small. So actually think wider and think, okay, what can I control here? I can control the questions I'm asking myself. I can control the people that I'm talking to about this. I can control the advice that I ask for. So focus on what you can control and kind of widen your view. And finally, think back and just think, when did I last do a hard thing? Because we've all done things that we thought were going to be really hard. When did I last do a hard thing? And did I manage it? You probably did. And so remind yourself you can do hard things. You can manage and you will be okay. And I think hopefully
No, that
those
is
will
the
help
key, isn't
people with
it?
that
To
right and
building.
wrong.
Sorry,
Go
Claire.
on.
We know that that's a key a lot of the times, or one of the elements, isn't it, to building your confidence when for us
Mm,
all in whatever we're looking at, doing those really difficult things. And as you say, then if you need to then reflect on it, making then a list of those difficult things that you've done,
yeah,
and that helps you then going forward to build your confidence in that area.
absolutely. Yeah, because then you've essentially what you're doing is you're building evidence to show your emotional brain that is really afraid and is worried about what the impact might be. But actually, there is lots of evidence that you can do these things and you can do difficult things. You've done difficult things before, and you can do this difficult thing today. So I thought it might be useful to share some real practical things that you can actually do to help build your confidence. So I think we've already talked about recording your wins. So write down the things you've learned, the things you've achieved, the things you can do now that you couldn't do before, and ask yourself those questions. I remember when I was getting divorced the first time, I I was really worried. This is going to sound ridiculous now, but I was really worried about mowing the lawn. I'd never used the lawnmower. My husband had always done it, and the grass was getting really long, so I thought I'm going to have to mow this lawn. I don't really know how to do it, but I'll give it a go. So I did it. I did it, and honestly, the feeling of pride having done that was immense. Sounds mad, but the feeling was really immense. So this is not just about big stuff. This isn't about I finished filling in my Form E or I've done all my preparation for my court hearing. This is about small everyday things. Record your wins, things that you have perhaps learned to do that you couldn't do before, things you've overcome, things you've achieved, something that you feel you did really well today. Record it all and stick it on your fridge where you can see it all the time because then your subconscious brain will start to soak it in. And another thing is to try new things. So your confidence grows every time you stretch your comfort zone. So if you stay within your comfort zone and keep it quite small, it becomes quite anxiety inducing when you have to put your toe outside of your comfort zone. So try new things. It could be anything. It might be saying yes to a small challenge. It might be going to visit somewhere new that you've not been before. It could be getting a new haircut. Um, it could be wearing a different colour that you're not used to. I remember talking to a client once who had they had arranged a coffee with a friend for Saturday, and that friend had then had to cancel last minute. And I remember him saying to me, well, I sat at home and I thought, do you know what, I could sit here, or I could take some of Claire's advice and I could go and do a new thing. So he took himself to a beach he'd not been to before. He took his book, sat in the sunshine, and he had a really, really nice day. Got talking to some people. He ended up going cold swimming with some of them later. So it can really open up your world, trying new things. And of course, meeting new people is good because those people, they don't know the you from before. They know you now. So you can kind of be who you want to be, when you meet new people. Um, and also, those things also boost your endorphins. So doing something that's new, that's exciting, will boost your endorphins, and that will counteract your cortisol. So really good. And then this links back to something you were talking about earlier as well. Another thing you can do is make sure that you're looking for options always.
Mm.
This isn't just in your divorce process, but in your everyday life. So I always think, if you think you've only got one option, you're stuck. If you have two options, you have a dilemma. And that's kind of the right and wrong mindset, isn't it? You've got a dilemma. But if you can look for three options, then you have choice. And even if you don't like two of the options, choosing the third one gives you a real sense of empowerment. You're making an active decision to do something. And it could be small things, it could be big things, and expressing your preferences as well, making your choices known. So, would you like an Indian or a Chinese or a pizza for dinner tonight? Make a choice. You've got a choice of three, pick one, rather than saying, I don't mind. It will help you to feel more confident in your own decision making and your own choices.
I Yeah, and I think as you grow, in terms of that's just confidence generally, but in terms of the divorce process, I would say that it's also helpful if you ask your solicitors to do that often, because we have meetings with clients and we think we've explained everything really well and they understand everything. And,
Mm,
I talk quite quickly, you've done it all, you think they're nodding, they understand everything, you hope they do. But actually, it's also about the process, particularly with your client, a client solicitor relationship, that they build confidence in what they can ask you as well during the process. I would welcome anything from a client saying, didn't really understand that. What does that mean? Can you clarify? But even that sometimes can be difficult. You've got to build your confidence up in asking. So if you've been to see your solicitor and they've talked to you and given you all the options, which is usually what will happen in a meeting, you can say, well, this is an option here, we can do this, we can do that. Then building the confidence too that if you don't remember them all or you don't really understand what option two was, by going back to them and saying, can you clarify again, could you just set out those three options that you did in the
mm,
meeting? And that takes quite a lot of confidence again if you haven't been used to. But solicitors, they'll expect people wanting clarification. So I'd say that that's a good thing to do. If you come out of your meeting, you think you've understood it all, but then there's something that you need clarification, do you go back to them and say, can you set out those options for me again?
mm.
And they'll just be able to set out option number two or all three options. And I think
Yes,
it's probably, that was interesting what you said about three options. I've never really thought about it like that, but often there are, it does work like that. Isn't more than two, because that's just, often how many different routes there are to go down. And one of the
mm,
most common ones in practical terms for us is, should I sell the house or should I stay in the home? Or
yeah,
should I buy someone else? Should I take on this really big mortgage or should we downsize? And that often comes in at least three. You know,
yeah,
you might want to sell, they want to buy you out, and you might want to buy them out. And they're all the different options. And you've got to think what's going to be best for you. As you say, that's interesting as well. Making the decision in that time with the information that you have, rather than worrying that it's not going to be the right decision in a year,
yes,
5 years, 10 years.
yes, because that can really keep you paralyzed. Yeah. So if you're, yes, exactly that. I was going to say something else that added on to what you were saying just now as well. There's always sometimes people struggle to find three options. They can easily see one option, which is, something that perhaps they don't want to do, and they can sometimes often easily see two options. Sometimes the third option is more tricky. Um, and so a question that you could ask yourself is a bit like one of the questions we were talking about before. If I could see more options, what might they be? Just ask yourself that. So if I could see more options, what might they be? Um, and often people forget that it's an option to do nothing. It is an option to not give a response. It
Mm.
is an option not to make a decision. By not making a decision, you are actually choosing something. You're choosing to keep the status quo. And sometimes when you add that in, that can really shift things. When if you've got two possible options, and then the third option is I do nothing and I keep the status quo, suddenly those two options become more attractive because keeping the status quo is so unattractive. So adding that in as an option can really open things up.
Yeah.
I would also advise everybody to make a list of your support network. Make a list of who's your friend you can call at any time. Your 3 a.m. friend, I like to call them. Make a list of all your friends who support you and lift you, your radiators. These are the people that you want to spend time with. These are the people who are going to help lift your confidence. These are the people who are going to help you to feel loved and supported and warm.
What
Um,
What do
Go
you
on.
think about asking? Sorry to interrupt. What do you think about asking though friends or family for advice about those decisions, which feel quite big to someone? It might help
Mm,
them to dissect those decisions, or you know, what sometimes I think people say is, "Oh, I want to ask." My dad has said this, but I know that his decision will be weighted because of X, or
mm,
you know, my best friend doesn't want me to move from living down the road, and so perhaps that decision. What do you make of that, Claire? What's the kind
yeah,
of when people are going off to speak to friends, family, new partner, whoever,
yeah.
about these decisions?
It's a really interesting question. And I think if you're looking to build up your own confidence and this is about your life, what I would suggest in those circumstances is that you sit down, first of all, and think about your options just from your own perspective. So get a piece of paper, see if you can find three options. Once you've looked at that and you've thought, okay, um, these are the options I've got. This one doesn't appeal because of this and this. This one is better because of this and that. But the problem is here, analyze them and only then go and talk to some other people. So it rather than going to lots and lots and lots and lots of different people to get lots and lots and lots of input, because that could be really, really overwhelming. Um, Go through it first. Think about it from your own perspective first, and then maybe take it out and ask for some input on the decision. So you're kind of reversing, um, who's actually in charge of the decision. Also, and you spoke about, the best friend who doesn't perhaps want you to move and things. Be really aware when somebody is coming from their own emotional place as opposed to your emotional place. That best friend at that point is coming from her own emotional place where she's or he is thinking about how they're going to miss you or how challenging it's going to be when you're not next door or down the road.
Yeah, so it's difficult to
So
then be
it's really
entirely impartial.
difficult. Yeah, and of course we're human and we like connection. So these things, of course, are going to come up. But I think see if you take a step back, see if you can look at whose emotional place these things are coming from. So, for example, you talked about the dad who's perhaps is good at giving advice around the numbers and things. If your dad is coming from a place where I don't know, he's an accountant and he's worked in this area for years, then his advice is probably really valuable. If your dad is really, really angry on your behalf or and perhaps wants to punish your ex or is coming from his own emotional space around this, and maybe his advice isn't quite so useful. So I think it's about the emotional space that somebody is in when they're giving you the advice.
So almost having a list of the people that you say, your 3 a.m. friend or this, but your list of your support network. And then
Mm,
which are all going to help you to build your confidence after a difficult
mm,
process of separation and going through the divorce, but then also kind of almost little notes by that person to say whether or not just to kind of reflecting on that person and
mm.
how they might consider a decision and what,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
asking them.
absolutely. And this sounds awful, but you're sort of looking at people and thinking, okay, how can they best support me? What's the best support that they can give me? Because you might have the friend who is brilliant if you're really upset and you want to rant, but they might not be so good if you need to make a decision about a mortgage. And you might have another friend who has particular skills. So think about the skills and resources that your friends have, and the I don't want to use the word use, but consult them accordingly. I think is a better word, isn't it? Consult the friend or the family member who's most um, who has the most resources to help you for the particular thing that you're trying to make the decision about. That makes sense. And bear in mind all the time their emotional place.
I think sometimes though we do lean towards the person that we know is going to give the decision that we want. So
Mm,
if you do that process that you write down first what you think, the pros and cons, and I think probably C in this situation, A, B, C, and I think C is
mm.
where I'm leaning towards. Isn't it sometimes, I suppose that's then reinforcement that you think you're making the right decision, but you just want it reinforced because you're going to the person who won't necessarily
Yeah,
you think they're probably going to say that will be your best option as well. You know
yeah.
your support network and friends really well, and say that's
Mm.
what is that possible? I mean, is it kind of without
Yeah,
realizing?
yes, absolutely it is because again our brains are wired to approach the person who we think is going to give us the answer that we want. So it may be that you have some people in your list and you make a little note beside them to say this person will always be honest and give me the answer that I might not like to hear but maybe need to hear, and make sure you always consult that person as well, perhaps so that you get the different viewpoints. So I think it really comes down to being very aware of what people's skill sets are and what their emotional state is, and consulting them accordingly. But yeah, and being aware of yourself. What you described just now. If you can be aware in yourself that you think option B is the best option, and you're going to go and talk to your friend so and so down the road because they're going to definitely agree with you, be really aware that that's what you're doing and perhaps challenge yourself. Okay, who might give me a different opinion? Who might look at this from a different perspective? Because that can be really helpful.
And if you hope, don't you, as you build confidence, that you need less input from
Mm.
others,
Yeah,
that you feel more
exactly.
confident in yourself just making that
Yeah,
decision.
exactly.
We
The
all,
goal is to
want
build
advice,
up.
don't we? But
Yeah,
some people are
yeah, exactly.
better than others, aren't they, at making those
Yeah,
decisions without, they don't want
mm,
anyone's input because they've got to the stage for that
yeah,
person that they say, well, I need to make this decision for me and I don't need to be,
yeah,
you know, sidetracked. This is what I know is definitely right for me. And that's quite rare though, isn't it? If someone
mm,
knows that that's what, is the right
yeah,
outcome for them or the right,
yeah,
decision for them.
yeah. And I also think that sometimes, I mean, this is a job for us perhaps to notice when somebody is very determined on exactly what they want, and we're thinking, and this might come up in sessions with me, and I'm thinking, what's the motivation underneath that? Let's dig into that a little bit more, to see what the motivation is for choosing option A, because option A may not be the best option, but you might be going down that road because, I don't know, because you're angry or because you're upset or because you are worried about the reaction and so on. So dig into it a bit more. Um, that leads me on to checking in with yourself. So we've been talking a little bit about being aware of oneself. So check in with yourself every day. I often ask my clients to start keeping a diary. So every evening they look in their diary and they write down three things perhaps that went well, or that they achieved today, or that they were proud of, or that they learned, anything that's sort of on in that positive arena, and write it down. And then in the morning, you go back and you reread what you did well yesterday and set an intention to look for other things today. It just helps to start shift the mind from looking for threats to actually looking for solutions and creativity. And that can really help. So keep adding to all these lists. Um, and then, of course, it goes without saying, make sure you look after yourself. Look after the basics of nutrition, sleep. And I know sleep can be really difficult sometimes, especially if you're in the early stages, perhaps, of divorce. Exercise a little bit, community. So I know some people either isolate themselves sometimes, or they spend a lot of time out with other people, sort of partying hard, and people do all sorts of things as coping mechanisms. But make sure you're getting some social input, and then routine. So make sure that you're perhaps getting up at the same time every day, you're going to bed at the same time, you've got a nice evening routine, and all of those things. Give yourself the best starting point for making some of these decisions.
And I also just on on the kind of looking after yourself and the health thing, if you have really, I mean, I'm sure you do the same, Claire, but if you've got someone who you think is decision paralysis, as you say. You just cannot think clearly, and it's more than just feeling in a temporary place of, this has been a really difficult time. Then you do, the so many people really struggle with their mental health due to the divorce process, for various reasons. So sometimes you will have to go and see your GP, see others who can help you get through that process first, and then come back to which are all great, all the practical things. But sometimes it's more than that, isn't it? And you need to go off and look to get some help with how
Yeah,
you're feeling, because so many of our clients are in the process when they're, has
yeah,
a significant impact on your daily mental health, isn't it? Going through something such so
yeah.
emotional as divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. And depression is a normal part of the grief curve, the journey through a trauma like divorce. So you will have those days where you don't want to get out of bed, that you keep bursting into tears and so on. Those days will happen. But if those days there are lots of them in succession, or it seems to be going on for a long time, please do, yeah, go and see your GP, go and talk. Um, Talking of talking, how you talk to yourself also has a real
Mm.
impact on your confidence. So it it's interesting to start noticing the words that you use when you talk to yourself. Do you do yourself down? Do you doubt yourself in your mind? Do you say to yourself, "Oh God, I'm so stupid"? All of those things. Start to really notice how you speak to yourself. So perhaps count over a day, count how many times you tell yourself that you're so, I don't know, silly, stupid, anxious, whatever it might be. Just notice first of all, and then flip it around. So what else are you? Are you also determined? Are you also tenacious? Are you also brave? There might be all sorts of other things, and start to talk to yourself in a different way if you can, because we all speak much worse to ourselves than we would ever speak to anybody else. So another really good way to think of this is to think to yourself, would I be saying this to my best friend in this situation? Would I be saying to my best friend, God, you're so stupid? No, we wouldn't. We'd be much kinder to our best friend than we would be to ourselves. So be as kind to yourself as you would be to your friend. Um, and another sort of linguistic trick is to flip I am. So I am anxious, for example. Flip it around to say I sometimes feel anxiety or I sometimes feel anxious. Because when you're talking to yourself in I am anxious, it becomes a part of your identity. It's an I am statement. Whereas when you can soften that to I sometimes feel anxious, it becomes a feeling and it becomes something that comes and goes. All of these feelings are temporary. They come, they go, they rise, they fall. They're not necessarily part of your identity. And it can really help to recognize that.
I was listening to someone talk on the radio. This is completely off piece, but it's from someone on the radio this morning where they, an expert, saying almost like when these thoughts come into your head, if it's a thought that's negative, worry, and you turn around and you say, thanks very much for your input, but it's not the right time now. I'll deal with that another time. I'll deal with that later. You almost speak to the thought and tell it to go
Yep.
away or something. I don't know, something
Yes.
along those lines. That's probably not exactly what was said, but it was just on the radio. I was trying to.
But psychologically, what that does is it's separating the thought from you. So that is a thought. Thank you very much for coming in. Now go over there.
Yeah.
I'm going to think about something else. I also like the image of, your thoughts. If you can imagine your thoughts are sort of going past you in like pebbles in a stream, you can choose which thoughts you want to pick out and really indulge, and which thoughts you want to just like watch pass on by. And I suppose that's similar, isn't it? It's allowing you to be outside of your thoughts. You're kind of an independent thing, independent of your thoughts. So yeah, I think that's really good. And keep going back to your list of wins. Remind yourself, you know, um, I am capable of learning new things. I can do difficult things. All of those things. Thinking about how you speak to yourself is really important. Before we finish, Natasha, I just wanted to ask, um, have you got any? Are there any stories that you could share, perhaps about where clients perhaps have really grown in confidence through the process? I spoke a bit earlier about my client who was really worried about all the bills, um, and
Um,
had worked their way through. Have you
I
seen
have to
clients go from
say,
being really
really,
nervous to, you know,
I can think of so many examples. I mean, so
mm,
many examples, but they'll be more general, I suppose.
yes,
And actually, when I think about it, and I'm sure that most solicitors will say this, it's very rare to have someone who appears to us. I mean, we don't know what they are in their day to day, but when they come to see us and when they converse with us solicitors, it's very rare, in my view, that you have someone who has become less confident at the end of the process than the start of the process.
mm,
Nearly all clients will kind of leave, whether it's 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, 18 months. And you as a solicitor, I think, do see a marked change in a lot of people in how they have built their confidence during that process, even when things have um, cause them to wobble along the way. So someone who comes in to see you, this is a classic example. Someone's just been ambushed, other partner, our husband in this situation has disappeared, said like literally, I'm going, that's it. All of our life is changing overnight. And they might then get some confidence over the course of the next few months. Then they might find out that they've actually within a relationship with someone else. And even that, they've already built their confidence up already so that they can then deal with that next kind of issue in a different way. So I think it's quite rare, but I do see, and I can think of an example, I can think of someone fairly recently, but I can see uh, people who have grown so much in that process that initially the person, would have their family member almost dealing with everything for them, sorry, so that
yeah,
they have given me authority to speak to their mum, their dad, their sister, or whomever, or even a friend, and they would rather that person do it. And you see them grow over the process to the state where they don't want them to. They want to actually come back to you, and they want to speak to you, and they don't actually want that other person now speaking to you because they want to give you their instructions and what they want. And I think that's a good example of how you can see people grow in the process. And that
mm,
just evolves rather than happens overnight over months of a process.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
and
think that's a brilliant
what
example.
I often say to someone is when they first come in, and I think this is a really good tip for someone if someone's going to see their solicitor for the first time. Quite often they'll be saying to people, I'm just going to go and see a solicitor to find out my rights in the divorce, if we do get divorced or if we do have a final separation. And I think if they are able to, before they go and see their solicitor, even though it might not have any legal basis at all, it's really helpful if they can sit down and think, what do I want out of this? What's the outcome that I'd like to see? What would I like to get out of this process? So it might be writing a list of, the finances. I would like to stay in the home, or it might be I would really like to see the children staying with me mainly, or I would like us to see us sharing our, shared arrangement. And if you can do that before you come in, it's one of the first questions I ask people. It depends on the situation, but it's often when what would you like the outcome to be? Never mind what the law is, what would you like the outcome to be? And that gives a really good starting point then to us and them to say, when you get to the end of the process, to look back. And it's really interesting because you have a situation where someone comes in and says, well, I just want to keep the house, I don't want to have any pension. We've talked about this on other divorce support clubs, haven't we? Because they
Yeah,
don't feel, they know probably that's not the right thing, but they don't feel confident to kind of challenge that because
mm,
someone's left and said, well, pension's in my name, but that's my pension, and you can have this, but you're not having any of my pension, so you can do everything else fairly, but this won't happen. So they will come in and say, well, I've thought about this, and this is what's going to happen. Yes, this is what I'd like. And as the process goes on, that's when you notice, that's the kind of practical example, you notice them saying, well, actually, I think now I've thought about it and chatted to people and had the advice from you and had the advice from my financial advisor or whatever. um, yeah, I now feel confident to say that's not right for me. And I
mm,
feel that, yeah, for me, my decision has changed and I would like to do that. And you see that so often. I think most solicitors will tell you that, as the process
mm.
goes on, you will you will see someone change their mind on that kind of the approach that they take as they've built confidence
Yeah,
to challenge that.
yeah, that's really interesting. And I think there's an aspect where, as professionals, we hold the belief for people that they can do this. So when somebody holds we're holding the belief that you can do this. So we believe you can do this, and that helps people then to grow into actually being able to do it. But I think people find that really difficult to, right at the beginning, I always ask people as well, what would you like your life to look like in a year's, 6 months or a year's time? And a lot of people don't really know, but they will know what's important to them. And so, I ask them about that. What's important to you? What is it important to you to preserve here? All of those questions, and we can hold the belief for people that they will grow in that confidence, I think, over time. Um, I think one
And
last thought.
that's also a
Go on.
balancing, sorry to interrupt, that's also a real balance as well, because some people who come to see me will already be in a
Mm,
place. I said that right at the start, getting back to right at the start, it depends on where they are in their
mm,
divorce journey, if you like. And someone will come in and say, this is what we want. I know what you may well say, but they're very confident in the decision that they've reached. And actually, you've got to balance giving the advice saying, well, these are your other options, and you might want to think about this because this is what the law might do for you if you're in the legal arena,
mm,
against the fact that they might be very clear. They might be very confident by this point and very clear about what they want. And we can't interfere with that either as professionals. You've got to give them the options, but it's definitely their decision, isn't it, in that
yeah,
situation? And sometimes you can feel that your solicitor's almost interfering with that process. So I think there's always a balance of giving
yeah,
people time to reflect and also doing things that they would like because they're very clear that that's what they want.
yeah. I think what comes from that is everybody experiences this so differently. And I
Yeah,
suppose
and
that
it,
goes back to your point earlier about, friends and family. Everybody's journey through this, everybody's situation, everybody's relationship with their ex-partner, the dynamics of that relationship, they're all so different. So rely more on the advice that you're getting from your professionals than, for example, the advice that you might get from a friend who says to you, "Well, I got divorced 5 years ago, and this is what happened, and this is what will happen, and you'll get this and that and the other." Um, yeah, it's an interesting one. Everybody's situation is so different. All the people we see are so different. Um, but that's why, a lot of the questions that I might ask, if I wasn't afraid of this, or if I was being most confident, or if I was, for somebody who you were describing just now, he was very, very confident. It might be, if I was to look at this from the other person's perspective, what might it look like? For example, there are really good questions that you can ask yourself at each stage. We're kind of drifting away from confidence now, I think, but um, you know, if you're feeling underconfident and you're at the start of the process, please be reassured that that confidence will come, especially if you start to do some of the things that we've talked about today. And you will get through this process and you will come out the other side. And this too shall pass. Something my grandmother used to say to me all the time, this too shall pass. Um, I think that takes us to the end. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. We're back again on the 15th of April, when we'll be talking to children through your divorce. And we'll be talking about all sorts of ways to talk to children, including how to respond perhaps when their other parent maybe lets them down. And that comes up a lot in sessions that I have with people. So 15th of April, we'll be talking about talking to children. So lastly, thank you, Natasha. It's always great having your expertise in the
yeah,
session.
thank you
So
for that.
thank you very much. And thank
Thanks,
you,
Claire.
everybody, for listening.